Want to keep up with the latest LEGO Maker 96.1 videos? Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Hello everyone, LEGO Maker 96.1 here with another video. And welcome back to another On This Day in History. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'll be covering over the entire Antietam campaign. Yesterday, I was gonna do a video, but I was busy with a couple of things, and I just didn't have the chance to make a video. So my apologies in advance, and I assure you, I will make more videos somewhere down the road, just as soon as I have the time to find an open schedule. So there's that. Now, what I said earlier, I will be covering over Antietam. Now, yesterday, of course, was the anniversary of the Battle of Antietam, which was the bloodiest single day in American history, resulting in more Americans killed, wounded, captured, missing, and so on and so forth. Now, you're probably wondering, what was Antietam? Well, as I said, it was the bloodiest single day in American history, and as I said earlier, resulting in more casualties than any previous battles put together. Now, this campaign started in September of '62, on the 4th. Now, Robert E. Lee commanded the Army of Northern Virginia, and he crossed the Potomac River to begin his first invasion of the North. Now, their goal, though many in the ranks know it, was to take the Pennsylvania capital of Harrisburg, because there was an arsenal that was supplying Union troops on the front lines. That includes uniforms, equipment, ammunition, everything. Now, the reason why it was at Antietam, because Maryland is the border state between the Union states and Confederate states. Although Maryland didn't join the fight, many Marylanders flocked to both the Union and Confederate ranks. And as the Confederates marched into Maryland, and many of Lee's troops began singing the state song, Maryland, My Maryland. Now, Maryland, My Maryland, which was the original state song, but it was removed due to ties of the Confederacy. Now, it was there that sometime on May 9th, or about it was about September 9th or on September 9th, that a copy of Lee's orders, Special Orders 191, were made and were dispatched to the Army. But a copy of it was lost. Now, soldiers from the 27th Indiana found an envelope and paper wrapped around 3 cigars. Among them was Burton Mitchell, who was a corporal of the 27th Indiana. He gave these to the sergeant major, and he would give it to the captain, and the captain to the colonel, and to the brigadier general, and all the way up to McClellan. Now, basically up the chain of command. Gripes go up, not down, as it were. McClellan found out that Lee had split his forces, and he decided to act right now. Now, he would engage his Confederate troops at a few places. It's like at South Mountain, which of course ended in a Union victory, and Crepin's Gap, which of course ended in a draw. Now, a draw for military purposes is neither side never won. You know, like the War of 1812? That's basically it. And during the Antietam campaign, Harper's Ferry was attacked by Confederate troops. Now, Union troops were stationed there or at Harper's Ferry, and so in that case, they could protect whatever road or building that comes their way. But Confederate troops, under the command of Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson, attacked Harper's Ferry and, of course, forced the surrender of the Union Army there. Now, for those who don't know what Harper's Ferry is, it is the same place where John Brown in 1859 led his raid on Harper's Ferry, in an attempt to spark a slave insurrection and to end slavery there. Now, the raid ended in a failure, and Brown was executed for his crimes. Now, the raid on Harper's Ferry occurred in 1859, which was a couple of years before the Civil War started. So there's basically that. Now, jumping on ahead to a place called Sharpsburg. Yeah, Sharpsburg, because that was the name of the town in Maryland. And Antietam is Antietam Creek. Same place, same battle, different name, and all true. Now, as I said, Antietam was the bloodiest single day in American history. There were a lot of fighting that occurred in that battlefield alone, like Burnside's Bridge, the Cornfield, the Dunkard Church, and many other places. Like there's like some intense fighting in there. The bloody single day occurred on the 17th, which of course you got these men from Wisconsin and Indiana. They marched through a cornfield and there were like Confederates right in front of them. Now these men from Wisconsin and Indiana, and maybe Michigan, and they were under fire from these men from Georgia. Now, when the Confederates were forced to push back or fall back, they had to crawl through or over the fence, and they continued fighting these men from Indiana and Wisconsin, and they were literally eyeball to eyeball, as it were. By eyeball to eyeball means they're like distant, like short distance apart from each other, and they were still loading and firing and shooting. And it was like a massacre. Now, the Dunkard Church saw some of that fighting as well. A Union regiment was posted there, but Confederates outflanked them, and they were forced to skedaddle. Now, another place was the Bloody Lane, also known as the Sunken Road. Now, the reason why it was called the Bloody Lane is because there were like, after the fighting, there were like Confederates piled on top of each other, and the road was soaked with blood. And speaking of blood, there was a Confederate officer, John Gordon, who was wounded multiple times in that fight, but miraculously, he survived. And years later, he still had the scars from that particular battle. Now, he was shot in multiple places, but the fifth one hit him in the face. And he was about to be smothered by the blood that was coming from the wound, but a Union bullet hit one of his hats, and the blood was pouring right out of the hole from the hat. Now, although Brown, who was a colonel of a regiment, would survive, one of his second in command assumed command of an Alabama regiment, which he commanded, and seeing Union troops was converging on them, he screamed out 6 Alabama, that was the name of his regiment. 6 Alabama, about face, forward, march. And these guys didn't need to be told twice. And speaking of regiments, there were these guys, these Irishmen, mind you. The Iron Brigade was in that fight as well. And half of these guys lost half of their numbers on the battlefield. But these guys, they put up one hell of a fight, and they were led by an Irishman named Thomas Marr. Now, if you don't know what the Irish Brigade is, now these guys, they were from New York and Pennsylvania and even Massachusetts. And these guys came from Ireland, and many of these guys were of Irish descent. But not all of them are Irish. Some of these men from Massachusetts, the 28th Massachusetts, they're not all Irish, but they were proven to be good fighters, and many of these guys became honorary Irishmen. Now, if you've seen Civil War combat, which they talked about Antietam, these Irishmen came out to the Sunken Road to fight the Confederates, and they greeted Marr as well as the Confederates with a roar of their Irish battle cry. their battle cry was Gaelic, was of course the Irish language. They said, Ba Abala, clear the way. Now, these guys, as I said, they were like hell of a fighters. Now, in case you don't know, I'm part Irish. Yeah, some of my family did come from Ireland, and I don't know if they fought during the war, but I can tell Irish are one hell of a fighters. I can tell you that for a fact. And speaking of Union, you know the colonel of the 54th, Robert Gould Shaw? He was in that fight, and he was with the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry as a second lieutenant. He was wounded twice in the fight, and in the fall of 62, he went home to recuperate and was promoted to captain. You know that scene in the movie Glory? That's it. Now, for many years after the battle, well, it was confirmed that the battle was a Union victory, but many years ago, the battle was inconclusive, meaning it wasn't finished. Because, of course, there were some of the heaviest fightings around. Like, for example, there was one Confederate regiment who doesn't have any ammunition, and they're like daring the Union men into fight them. And speaking of Confederates, Longstreet and his staff officers took command of one artillery piece after the artillerymen abandoned their position and started firing on the Union. Now, many of Longstreet's staff have never fired a cannon, but you would see Longstreet on the field holding the staff officers' horses by their bridle, and he was telling these guys to load and fire those guns as the Union men were approaching them. And speaking of Antietam, there were like the Union. Blah, blah, blah. And speaking of Antietam, European powers saw the Confederates and what they're doing, and they wanted to help them out. Now, the Civil War was gaining attention not just across the entire nation, but the entire world as a whole. France and England wanted to join the Confederates and help them win the war. But after Antietam, that changed. And speaking after the fight, Lincoln proposed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, he wouldn't issue this until a major Union victory. Antietam, of course, was that victory. Now, of course, that battle did end in a Union victory, and the total amount of casualties was 12,410 on the Union side and 10,337 on the Confederate side. Those were a lot of bodies, I can tell you that for a fact. And if you've seen pictures of the aftermath of the battle, it was pretty gruesome. And even to this day, Antietam is talked about in the history books, and even in many Civil War documentaries, Civil War related movies, and so on and so forth. Now, as I said, I talked about in the movie Glory that Shaw was wounded in that fight, but there was a goof in that scene. Shaw wasn't a captain at the time of the battle, he was a second lieutenant. He would be promoted to captain sometime after the battle, until he was given command of the 54th Massachusetts and given the rank of colonel. Now, this is for you old timers out there. You remember the miniseries North and South with Patrick Swayze and George Hazard? Antietam was in that scene. James Reed. The actor's name is James Reed, who played George Hazard. So there's that. And I know there's some Yellowstone fans out there, but in 1883, the series, there was a snippet of the Antietam fight in this series. I included so I wouldn't exclude Yellowstone. I know there are people out there that like the show, but for me, not a fan, and never will be. And another movie, and this is in the extended director's cut of Gods and Generals, which of course talks about the rise and fall of the legendary Confederate General Thomas Jonathan Jackson. Antietam was in that fight as well, but there's also a goof. Now, when Antietam appeared, it said on September 19th of 1862. Yeah, Antietam occurred on the 17th. So that battle happened 2 days ago. And how do I know this? Well, I did some research on the Antietam battle, and the battles that occurred on the 19th was Shepherdstown, which happened on the 19th and the 20th of 1862, and it ended on a Confederate victory. So, in other words, in that movie, it was a goof. Could it be fixed? Absolutely. But if you're going to do a Civil War movie, it could be any type of battle, you need to do research. Like, let's say you're going to do Gettysburg. First, you got to get the names, you got to get the dates of the battle that happened, get the commanders, get the military units that participated in, their strength, who lived, who died, and what were the casualties. Because remember, history is important. And those who don't know history are forever doomed to repeat it. I'm going to say that again. Those who don't know history are forever doomed to repeat it. Okay? So there's that. And continuing on with the Antietam battle, there's also the attack on Burnside's Bridge. Now, what was the name of the original bridge? We don't know. It's called Burnside's Bridge because of the Union Corps commander that was fighting Confederates on top of the hill overlooking the bridge, Ambrose Burnside. That's the guy with the amazing sideburns on his face. Sideburns have to do with facial hair. Now, there were many attempts to take that bridge, but there were two Union regiments with the same numerical designation that made that effort to take the bridge. Now, these men were from the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York. And they went in and they poured fire on these Georgian men that were posted along the hill overlooking the bridge. And seeing the enemy fire begin to slack, many of these guys, without orders, got up and they charged across the bridge and they forced the Confederates to retreat. I gotta tell you, that was ballsy moves right there. I mean, without orders, but these guys just basically got up and missed the gunfire, and they just charged across the bridge, and they took that bridge. It's before you can say Ticonderoga, if you can say Ticonderoga. It's a Three Stooges joke. Look it up. And, yeah. And for me, I've been to Maryland myself, but unfortunately, I have never been to the Antietam battlefield. Never been. I mean, I want to, but usually where I go in Maryland is like too far out. So there's basically that. I mean, I want to someday, but I just gotta save up a lot of this. And at this time, I'm going to give a moment of silence for those brave Union men who fought and died in the Antietam Campaign. And I'd like to give a moment of silence for our Confederate dead during the Antietam Campaign. Well, that was fun. And that concludes today's video. Oh, and if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like this, including the many other videos that I've done on my channel, please feel free to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell notifications so that way you can be notified when I upload the next video. And as always, this is LEGO Mega 961 signing off.